One of the most frustrating things for any automation and robotics leader is to find that perfect candidate who says all the right things, knows all the right answers, and talks a big game. But when you hire that person and they show up on day one, they're nowhere near the performer they portrayed during the interview process. It's happened to all of us, including you, I'm sure. Hey there, Jay Vennard, the robotics recruiter, and today I want to share with you the 4-part assessment process that you need to implement right away if you want to completely de-risk your chances of another mishire. Now, stay with me because this video is a little bit on the long side, but the tips I'm going to give you are gold and will most certainly increase your chances of landing an all-star. Before we get into it, allow me to throw a couple stats your way backed by 2 major studies. You'll want to pay close attention here because these numbers are pretty staggering. The first one was conducted by the Leadership IQ organization. It was conducted, and they conducted a 3-year study of 5,214 managers across 312 organizations, hiring more than 20,000 employees. I mean, this is a huge study. What Leadership IQ found was that over an 18-month period, 46% of those hires were mishires. And that's only one of several studies with those numbers. Now let's think about that 46% number for a second. You see, that's basically a flip of the coin, right? It's pretty scary. And quite frankly, those odds are worse than playing Russian roulette. And we all know the negative effect a mishire can have on your leadership career. Now, let's look at another study done by the University of Massachusetts. They found that 81% of people in their study lied about themselves during job interviews. Participants in that study told an average of 2.19 lies per 15-minute interview. It's pretty shocking. So if you do the math in your entire leadership career, you've been spoon-fed close to 9 lies in every hour of interview time. And that's in 80% of the interviews you've conducted. It's no wonder why the mishire rate is so high across the board, right? It comes down to the old saying, people are perfect only twice in their lives. Once when they're born, and once when they apply for a job. So to solve that for you, I'm going to share with you these 4 critical steps that you can immediately infuse into your interview process to help you and your organization separate yourself from those horrible stats and be the exception to the rule. So these 4 interview steps are the on-demand video interview, the competency interview, the DNA interview, and the test drive. So let's talk about each one of them briefly. First, the on-demand video interview is basically a standardized interview platform that takes place of your traditional phone interview. Because let's face it, phone interviews aren't very effective at all anymore. But we're not going to get into that discussion right now. But in essence, the on-demand video interview takes the candidate through a series of 5 to 7 technical and sometimes behavioral questions that can be answered on their own laptop or mobile device and on their own time. Now, the benefits are numerous, but one of the biggest benefits is the ability to assess a candidate's executive presence, which you simply can't do with a traditional phone interview. Plus, you get to avoid all the scheduling conflicts that can oftentimes turn off an all-star candidate who is currently employed. Now, video interviews also allow you to better communicate your employer value proposition through the use of branding videos, both pre and post interview, right on the platform. Now at Ventec Search Group, we do offer this service for our clients, but if you want to do it yourself, you can use a service such as HireVue or SparkHire. Those are both really good products. Now, once you've made your selection, whether it's a video interview or phone interview, and you decide that you want to bring somebody in, you want to move to the competency interview. The competency interview should 100%, no questions asked, be done by you, the hiring manager. Because let's face it, you're the one with the most intimately familiar with the job. So we now have your candidate on site. You should walk them through their career history. And it's very important that you go from the earliest to the most recent, or at least 10 years prior. Anything more than 10 years doesn't really matter. And just a tip, never start with the most recent job. In this conversation, you're looking for a trend of performance because obviously the best predictor for future success is past performance. You'll want to dig into each position, again, going from past positions to the most recent. You're going to want to ask questions such as, how do you fit into the organization? Tell me about the reporting structure. Any direct reports? Tell me about your project ownership. Tell me about quantifiable accomplishments. And by the way, what you want to look for is for someone who is able to articulate what the situation they were tasked with, the actions they took to execute, what the possible solutions were, and what the measurable results were. Next, you're going to want to ask what challenges they faced and how they overcame those challenges. Next, you'll ask, if you get to the reference stage, what should I expect to hear from your manager? That's one of my favorite questions. I absolutely love that one. Ultimately, what you're looking for is career trajectory and momentum. Is the candidate's career trajectory ascending or is it flatlining? This information is going to help you forecast what their performance will be working with your company. Now, I'm not saying that you can't hire someone who's strong that's making a lateral move, but quite frankly, and more often than not, the metrics show that all-stars almost always are ascending. Now, with that said, notice in this step, I did not ask technical questions because you should have already vetted those out with the video interview or the phone interview. Now, you're certainly going to have another opportunity to more deeply assess technical skills when you talk about the test drive, but we'll get to that later. Now, the third step in the process is the DNA interview. Now, in essence, when you say DNA, what we're talking about here are behavioral traits. We're not talking about a cultural fit. We call them DNA because these are traits deeply written into, well, your DNA. These are the soft skills that are not easily changed within most individuals. Now, behavioral skills is a big buzzword in the industry because a lot of organizations say they ask behavioral-based questions, but quite frankly, most interviews and organizations as a whole do it wrong. Chances are you've been in one of these interviews where the panel of interviewers, for the most part, ask the same behavioral questions, and it usually happens at the end of the interview and feels like a complete afterthought. So here's my recommendations on that. Take the top 3, maybe 4 all-stars from your team or from within the overall department and interview them. And between yourself and the other leadership team, come up with as many characteristics on a whiteboard as possible as to why you think those people are the all-stars that they are. You're going to want to ask yourself, what makes them tick? Why are they successful? Why do they stay with us? Why did they join our organization in the first place? Take as many characteristics as you possibly can from the whiteboard and narrow it down to the top 3 to 5 characteristics. So for example, it could be a sense of self-actualization, which is a deep drive to face challenges. Or maybe it's a deep drive to find fulfillment in their work. It might be grit, which is courage and resolve, or strength of character into hardship. Maybe it's flexibility where one can adjust their approach when new information presents itself. You know, I could go on and on here, but I think you get the point. Now, this is going to be the precedent and the benchmark that you're going to utilize when interviewing candidates on DNA to figure out if they fit within the company and the department's overall DNA. So here's what you want to do. Instead of asking just a few behavioral questions right after the competency interview is about to end, you want to break up the interview panel, have 3 separate interviewers conduct 3 separate interviews. In essence, you're going to have one interview deep dive into 1 or 2 of the DNA qualities. If you have each interviewer cover 1 or 2 DNA characteristics, even though they may all be asking the same questions, they're going to be attacking each from a different angle. And each is going to be assessing one aspect of that person's background based on the questions that they're asking. Believe me, This will dramatically help you determine whether or not the candidate is going to be a fit within your organization. Now, this is such a critical step and virtually no one ever does it. So for example, here are some questions you can ask to assess DNA. Tell me about your favorite job ever and your least favorite job ever, and why. Tell me about your best boss and your worst boss, and why. Tell me about the work environment you thrive in most, or, for example, tell me about the most challenging environment you've had to work in, and why. Now, there's something critical that you should 100% do in both the competency and the DNA interviews, and that is use a scorecard. Now, this step is so critical. You want to make sure you use a scorecard because you need everybody to be as cold and clinical as possible. You want to make sure you take the gut instinct out of the process and only rely on the scorecard to make decisions as you rank the quality of the candidate's answers, okay? So give the candidate a score of between 1 and 10, 10 being the highest. Now, metrics show that your all-stars, those A players, they're going to live in the 8s, 9s, and 10s. Now, 10s are literally pretty rare, so you're going to have a lot of 8s and 9s. Anybody else that falls below 8 simply is not an all-star. Now, they may be a solid B, but you're not going to find the strongest candidates below 8, okay? And just as a point of reference, your C's and B's are the 6 and 7 sort of range. Now, let's move to the fourth and final step of the interview process. This is the test drive. This is actually my favorite step because it strikes fear into the B and C players. In essence, this is a working interview. Do you remember the stat earlier in the video from the UMass study that said hiring managers are spoon-fed up to 9 lies per hour of interview time across 80% of the interviews they conduct? The test drive virtually eliminates that because, quite frankly, it's very difficult to lie or stretch the truth in a working interview. For example, if you want to think about buying a car, think of all the research that you did when it comes to the car. Now, despite the level of comfort that you might have from all your research, I guarantee you would have never purchased that car had it not been for the test drive. And the very same thing holds true when interviewing and hiring. So here's how to do a test drive interview. Take your top 1 or 2 candidates at most and take them through a test drive, or what we'll call a working interview. In essence, you're going to put them in a real-world simulation based on the actual work they'll be doing once they join your company. Now, this is where it gets tricky because for a lot of you, you may think, well, okay, sure, I could put an engineer in a sandbox environment and I could test hard technical skills, but how do I test other real-world skills I need? Here's how. For example, let's take an automation engineer who's doing either integration or configuration, let's say. We'll give that person a sample business problem where they will lead a requirements gathering workshop in there, and in there you can assess their business skills, communication skills, their creative thinking, how they work through the problem, and then have them configure or customize an appropriate solution in a sandbox environment so you can assess their technical skills. Or if it's a project manager, give them a sample project with a defined set of deliverables and see how they go about planning the project, how they work through the challenges, as well as delegating to team members. Or let's say it's a senior executive. Have them attend mock staff meetings. They can lead a strategy session, they can prepare a SWOT analysis for your automation environment, and they can present a PowerPoint presentation to the board. And when they do that, you look for their insights, look for their clarity of analysis, look for their ability to evangelize and implement new ideas. Now, I know a lot of these steps may be a pain in the butt to implement, especially the test drive, but the bottom line is this is your hire. The buck stops with you. And if this candidate who you envision could potentially skyrocket your own career ends up being a dud, well, your future self will wish they could go back in time and implore your younger self, you right now, to do just a little more due diligence. It really is that important. Now, if you want to find out more about how you can completely de-risk your hiring decision and how you can consistently hire the top 10% of automation and robotics talent, we're talking people working directly for your competitors, the ones not on the job boards, then what you're going to want to do is click down below and download the Automation and Robotics All-Star Playbook. This bad boy right here, it's completely free, my 69-page mega guide on finally eliminating all of your mishires, building elite, top-performing teams, and crushing all expectations. This guide goes into so much more detail than we can go into a single video. But believe me, it's sorely needed in our industry. Think about this. If you go to any airport bookstore, you'll find row upon row of business books on mentorship, leadership, business mindset, marketing, but almost none on recruiting, and certainly none on hiring top talent in the automation and robotics space. You see, leaders aren't taught this, and I want to change that, because if you can take your flip of the coin risk of a mishire and turn it on its head consistently across the board, you'll be able to write your own ticket. And guess what? You'll be one of the few Hall of Fame leaders companies fight over. But it all starts right here. So go ahead and grab your free guide down below. I promise you'll love it. Now, if you need some additional one-on-one help, go to my website, theroboticsrecruiter.com, and click on the Need Talent link to book a strategy call with me. Now, with that said, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Have a great one, and see you later.